And being rather new to Google, I wasn't really aware of what Google's kind of attitude was towards race in the internet. So I thought, what a great way to find out would be to bring André in and have him give a talk. So he's here actually in town for the iConference, which is happening in Seattle this week. And so I stole him away for a day to come and talk to us about race in the internet. And he's talking about Blackbird, which was a browser that I knew nothing about until I got the abstract for this talk. Apparently that was designed for the African American community. So I'm very interested in this talk, and I hope other people at Google are as well. Anyway, so André, take it away.
Okay. Gee, I don't know how to begin. Can we do interruptions? Do I have to talk straight through?
No, interruptions.
Okay, so feel free to interrupt at any point. If it gets too unwieldy and I don't think I'll be able to finish in time, I'll just cut the question short. But I have a lot of information packed. This was a 40-page paper, and now it's like a 15-slide presentation, so there are going to be some gaps. And I'd appreciate if you pointed some stuff out that you think I could probably add to the presentation. So my name is André Brock. I'm a faculty at the University of Iowa, the School of Library and Information Science. As Cameron said, we were in the same PhD cohort at Illinois, and so my degree is Library and Information Science as well, but I also have a background in rhetoric. So one of the things that drew my interest to this particular case was I love looking at information technology products, but I also like looking at the ways in which people understand themselves in relation to the product. And so this case came up to be, this specific case study came to be really interesting for me. So I call it the curious case of a black browser. Any apologies to Benjamin Button or so cultural values is a predictor of technology use. So when people say that I was on the internet, they take for granted that their friends will understand that they used a browser to access the web. And it's not difficult to see why. Browsers frame the content, media, and protocols we know as the World Wide Web, and they have become part of our social life, our work routines, and our leisure activities. As such, the browser is a cultural artifact, defining its users as technologists and as social actors. It's part of our communicative infrastructure, and usually it's invisible to our information literacy practices until a rupture occurs. One such rupture found form in the 2008 introduction of the Blackbird browser, which was developed by three guys at a company, 40A, and it was designed to serve the browsing needs of African Americans. The cultural focus of the browser engendered a really kind of scathing response from black and white internet users alike, because it apparently contravened popular assumptions of the browser's cultural neutrality. So where most tech products are evaluated in terms of their ease of use, their user interface design, or their feature set, Blackbird's reception as an ICT artifact, and by ICT, which I'm going to say a lot, I mean information and communication technology. So Blackbird's reception as an ICT artifact was colored by the racial frames of the pundits, bloggers, and commenters who discussed it. So let me give you a little bit of my analytical background. This is what Blackbird looks like. This is the Mac version. It's ugly. I will be honest and say that it's ugly, but we'll talk about it a little bit more further in the presentation, but I just want to give you an idea of what it looks like. It's a branch of Firefox, and so it can use the plugins that Firefox uses. It uses basically the same theming set and everything, but there are some special features, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. So my research area is I examine cultural biases encoded within information and communication technologies, and I pair them with insights into the technological biases expressed through the culture of the users. And this is one approach through which cultural and racial motivations can be apprehended as functional rationales for technology use. So this lovely triangle here is the beginning of an illustration I came up with to show my research approach to ICT usage. This particular approach was originally conceived by Arnold Pacey, but it also draws, I don't know how many of you are comm studies scholars, on James Carey's work on communication technologies and belief. So Pacey described technology as having three components. The first one is the material artifact, or in this case, the code. The second is the practices necessary to employ the artifact. And then the third is the beliefs of the users. And Pacey argued that tech artifacts are usually understood by describing either their form or their use. I contend, along with Mr. Pacey, who's much smarter than I am, that the cultural and social beliefs of technology users play a significant part in the design, adoption, dissemination, and use of any tech. And these can range from unconscious design decisions based on physical traits, right-handed dominance, or to deeply held cultural associations between race and intelligence. So I have my triangle. So this is, if you've read anything from Wired or Gizmodo or even the New York Times technology section, they primarily focus on what an artifact does and what you can do with it. Nobody really talks about belief, except for me, because I'm a groundbreaking researcher in this field. Okay. Yeah, let me make sure I got the right slide here. So I employ a structural approach to information technologies, and I argue in my work that ICTs operate as projects linking social structure and cultural representation. They frame discursive representations of cultural phenomena, so blogs, bulletin boards, advertisements, search engines, and the like, and they work to organize resources along particular cultural lines. The browser represents a belief in an implicitly unmarked technological space. But the openness of the platform obscures the fact that most content available to the browser articulates very culturally specific representations of race, gender, and class. And yes, I am aware that the browser gives you the freedom to navigate to those particular cultural resources that may be of interest to you. But if you consider that many internet users are technologically unsophisticated, a lot of them never change the start page of their browser, or, well, this isn't as bad as it used to be. Many of them were AOL addicts and are very much aware of the AOL curation of the internet and are not necessarily as comfortable with the Internet Explorer / Firefox freedom to navigate freedom. Okay, so so my argument is that even if it is an open space, that open space is still framed by certain cultural and technological considerations. For the U.S. and much of the West, the cultural representations draw primarily upon white identity markers and values. One of my favorite theorists, Richard Dyer, argues that whiteness at once represents the sign of humanity and the marker of individual agency. And my new favorite example, is that if we consider recent violent killers, Jared Lee Loughner of Arizona fame is a troubled individual with no ties to the Tea Party, although he shot a congressman and all this other fun stuff, while Major Nidal Hassan, the Fort Hood shooter from last year, was suspected of being a radical Muslim extremist despite a documented history of mental problems. So even in individual cases, there are still cultural frames through which we understand content. So the browser shares this universal and individual identity, and it maps closely onto whiteness. So the universal traits of the browser are, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, evidence to its access to and command of temporal, geographic, and economic networks, and informational. The widespread adoption of the browser as a communication device does speak to its universal qualities, but it also obscures its utility as an artifact of information networks that bolster economic and social-cultural hegemony. So if you think about the case where Microsoft was bundling IE browser with Windows installs and how Europe made them break it away from that, because what they found out was that bundling led people to automatically use that browser and not exercise their freedom of choice. I'm making the same argument that browsers in general, not just browsers bundled with the system, but browsers frame the way that we understand the way the web works. There's an individual piece of this, though. The current generation browsers enact a lot of personalization. So there's recent research that shows that a browser usage can be as individualized as a fingerprint. Users can change themes, they can block advertising, and they can even alter style sheets of existing websites. They are encouraged to store confidential information, password managers, or maintain a library of notable sites. So while many people use the same browsing software, few will use them in the exact same way. And you know this if you've ever tried to use somebody else's laptop, right? Because it's always configured in a way that seems completely, can I use retarded in a presentation? In a way that seems completely incomprehensible to someone who doesn't use it every day. So the experience of universal application and individual preference then prejudices users to assume that the universal web, configured to their personal liking, is similarly configured for everybody else who uses it. And in this way, and in the same way, Western culture assumes that the universal values that are part of the mainstream are equally valid and desired by every individual under their sway. And so that's the meat of my argument. And so there's some wiggle room in there because it is structural, but I try to account for the fact that there's individual preference that is part of and yet diversely represented within cultural frames. Let me know if I lost you. I forgot my lovely animations. Hey, whiteness. Okay. The browser is a software artifact, but it's also a communication product. So C. Edwin Baker, who wrote the book Mass Media and Democracy, argued that communication products offer different benefits depending upon the role that various stakeholders involved in its design, dissemination, and consumption. Media content contributes to the rationalization of particular behaviors, as well as affecting the significance of those beliefs. And he adds, and I'll quote him here, even more than its direct value to the audience, the media's greatest value may be for third parties. Even if they do not consume the media content themselves, they can be wonderfully or gravely affected by the media's influence on its audience's construction of reality and on their resulting behavior. And my example for this is if you consider the adoption of Facebook. Can I say Facebook or Google? Okay, good. So Facebook, prior to, say, a couple of years ago, was becoming a watchword in certain tech circles, certain educational circles, but it still was at the tipping, it wasn't quite at the tipping point where it gathered a huge mainstream adoption. As recently as 2008, Facebook didn't have as many users as MySpace. I know that's kind of hard to believe at this point. And so I don't know about the communities that you come from, but the small town Louisiana that I grew up in and the neighborhoods in New York, my parents and my grandparents refer to Facebook as the Facebook. Right, and they have a very different understanding of why somebody would want to post their personal lives on a platform that's available for people to basically consume at their whim. Right, so there's a different understanding of Facebook depending on your level of technological savvy, your level of technological experience, and your attitudes toward information technology in general. Baker concedes that his arguments have to be significantly expanded to encompass the internet as a media product. For example, he reasons that the internet's lowered copy and delivery costs greatly increase economic incentives to provide everyone with the same good, but also create parallel incentives to orient content toward universal motifs. So sex is a really good one, violence and good versus evil, and this leads to the sacrifice of culturally specific content. These universally understood themes are those that generate the greatest profit, and that leads to a further commodification of content. So the content that appeals to the most people is the one that people make the most money off of. Porn would be a really good example. And so although the browser does not directly represent or embody the content displayed within its interface, and I'm willing to argue that with you, its role in delivering and framing that content connects it ideologically to the cultural values transmitted within the content. Okay, so the meat of it. For my analysis, I conducted an interface analysis of the browser, briefly reviewed, although I won't talk about it here, the history and practices of web browsers in general and Blackbird in specific. I also carried out a close reading of blog posts and associated comments on 6 blogs, two mainstream and 4 African American interest blogs, to understand how they constructed the browser, in terms of their experience and identities. And so my close reading focused upon instances of discursive association between culture and technology. So if somebody said, I am X and I use this product, or I think X people use this product in this way, that's the stuff that I picked up on and coded for, right? Positive, neutral, or negative across the general categories of the blogs they are found on. So I separated out into tech blogs and general interest blogs. And then these observation and analyses were laid out against some of the critical race framework that I talked about briefly earlier, the whiteness and Western culture, and the technocultural stuff, the artifact, practice, belief triangle. So interface analysis and discourse analysis is what we're going to talk about next. We'll start off with interface analysis, and again, back to the lovely Blackbird browser. You can't see it because this is a static web shot, screenshot, but if you look directly under the address bar, you'll see a number of headlines under there. What that is a moving ticker, and it represents curated content that the browser or the people behind the browser feel is of interest to its users. And then it has a number of buttons across the top which represent various features. The ticker can be turned off, the buttons cannot. There also have Twitter posts from people who they consider, although they don't give the algorithm or the rationale for who they selected, other than that they might be black, of people who are black and tweeting, and then headlines from various African American news sources. So News One, Black Voices, Bossip, which is a black entertainment blog, and the like. Whew, coffee. Okay, so Blackbird offers a number of features specific to its installation that make it different from a standard Mozilla/Firefox installation. It's very similar. I don't know if you guys have used the Flock browser, at least before it switched to WebKit, or Gloss browsers. Flock was social networking in general, and Gloss was women-centric, including a pink theme, because women love pink, apparently. Each variant features custom interface tweaks designed to visually identify the browser, so Blackbird's is strangely enough, black, and as well as plugins, custom searches, and other features to enhance the targeted user's experience. Blackbird's creators include in-browser access, so they have a sidebar that you can pop open to using one of the buttons on the toolbar to Facebook and MySpace. But strangely enough, they didn't offer a link to the largest majority black social network, which is Black Planet. And so they're expecting their users to leverage existing social network accounts, and they're allowing their users to browse both their social networks and the web simultaneously. Flock does this as well. I think you can set up Firefox to do it, but it's kind of awkward. So I'll talk about two of the features here. Well, actually, I'll talk about one of the features here in the interest of time. But some of the things that Blackbird offers its users are a custom Google search. Go ahead, Cam.
So I just had a question. The people who did this, the 40A, was their motivation for developing Blackbird like financial? Was this a product that they were trying to market and sell, or were they making revenue off of people using it somehow, or was it purely some sort of altruistic, I'm going to port this for the African American community?
Some of it was, okay, I'm sure there was an altruistic kernel of motive, but one of the design issues for Blackbird that a lot of the people who were discussing and picked up on is that this was a very siloed system. So although you could import and access your Facebook and MySpace profiles, the rest of the features, so they have a custom video channel, they have a dig clone called Grapevine, they have a couple of other features, are only for people who sign into the Blackbird network. So they were planning on getting people in using Facebook and MySpace and then keeping them there with the content and then serving ads or whatever to them in that way. So it's a money-making venture, but there is a slightly different core to it. That okay? Good.
Yeah.
Okay, so the features were the custom Google search, the news ticker, which is preloaded but customizable. There are pre-selected bookmarks featuring African American websites and websites of interest to African American people. So there was a 2008 Nielsen survey. Apparently, black people go to the IRS website more than any other website that they're interested in. BET came in third. It was IRS and I think Yahoo. Sorry. That was 2008 though. I mean, things have changed. There's the feature called Give Back, which links to Good Together, which is a site that links internet users with nonprofits so they can donate through the browser, and those donations will be targeted to nonprofits. In this particular case, they targeted African American websites, which is a pretty unique feature. There's a customized video channel called Blackbird TV, available only to Blackbird users. Local and job listings that are backed by a targeted advertising campaign specifically for African American communities. So in New York and Atlanta, I've seen advertisements in the Blackbird browser for businesses to advertise on this and have a captive audience. And then the dig clone, Blackbird Community, which is the browser center social network that lets users share content and vote on it. It also offers one-button access to Yahoo Mail, Hotmail, or Gmail. The buttons offer unread email notifications, and you can switch between accounts without going to the address bar. And then the previously mentioned Facebook or MySpace, again, you can switch between them with one click. And so that's the browser. So the part I want to talk about, in part because I'm an instigator, I want to talk about the custom Google search that Blackbird offers. So Blackbird has a search that is designed to present positive results about African American content to the people who are using it. And so I ran a very quick and dirty search using the keyword black girls. As Gina pointed out, I did black girls plural, not black girls singular. And so what I get if I run the Google search, this is, I'm not signed in, moderate safe search applies, and these are the top 5 results. Sorry for the profanity on the Google intranet. These are the top 5 results for black girls if you just do a simple search, right? And I won't leave that up there long. This is the Blackbird results for the same exact search. The kicker for me, at least as a researcher, is that, and I've talked about this a little bit with Cam, is that even in the fact that they got a custom search term that shows websites that are of interest. So you'll see BET.com is one of them, Black Enterprise is another, and then the odd one, the YBF, the Young, Black, and Fabulous, which is a gossip site. But these are the ones providing the top results for the same topic. But they also have this lovely ad box on the side with hot black girls and big black sex, which is problematic, but that's another thing altogether. So the creators of Blackbird, they contended that black content can be difficult to find using regular searches. And given this quick and dirty experiment, I would be tempted to agree with them. I've run, for the paper, I ran a much more comprehensive search for Barack Obama, and I couldn't replicate it for this presentation because at this point, Barack Obama is the president and not a relatively unknown candidate from Chicago, and so the search results are very similar, actually, at this point. So the White House website for Barack Obama comes up in 2010, where it didn't come up in 2008. Let's see, where else was I? Oh, the features differentiating Blackbird from other browsers speak to 40A, the developer's concept of embedded social networking as one definition of a community, but also the inclusion of content, specifically layering African Americans, layers a cultural definition of community on top of the software internet instantiation, and offers a compelling visualization of the explicit integration of ethnic and technocultural practice. 40A's implementation comes across as a criticism of the structural inequities of mainstream internet content that privileges the information needs of middle-class male white internet users, right? And it's not to say that other browsers are bad, but if you are a certain ethnic persuasion, and it doesn't have to be ethnic, we tried Asian girls, I've tried searches for abled and disabled people, and the searches tend to come up kind of random. And so there's obviously a need for targeted search results if you're searching for information that is not porn. Okay, racial technoculture. As the web has matured and reached a broader swath of the population, its interactive nature enables discussions about tech objects that expose technocultural beliefs. These discussions construct or reconfigure the properties, practices, and beliefs that people bring to their understanding of technology. So my favorite example from my class is the Mac. When I ask my students, and these are library and information science students, many of them want to be librarians, some of them we bring to the dark side and make them information scientists. But when I asked them what type of person uses a Mac, they were pretty unanimous in saying they were snobs, they were geeks, right? And they wanted to be hip. Right, has nothing to do with the features of the Mac whatsoever, but that is their perception of a Mac user. Not that, oh, the Mac OS doesn't crash that often, or, oh, the user interface is clean. They didn't care about that. They had specific ideas of people as tech users. And so in that vein, this next part of the presentation briefly visits discussions about the design and deployment of Blackbird by people who are internet users on technology and cultural blogs. So to understand this discussion, I selected 6 weblogs of examples, four examples of how ideological and cultural factors influence technology analyses. And operationalize online discourse, my favorite word, operationalize, I still hate that word. The selected blogs have a post specifically addressing Blackbird and comments from their audiences that consistently address the same topic, so very few off-topic discussions. There are approximately 500 comments total across all 6 blogs in this analysis. So the 2 mainstream sites, and I didn't select as many mainstream because they had such a high volume of comments, were TechCrunch and Ars Technica. The black tech blogs are BlackWeb 2.0 and Maroney Smith, and then the general interest black blogs are AroundHarlem.com and The Angry Black Woman. And Maroney Smith and BlackWeb 2.0 represent examples of race-oriented, technology-focused blogging, emphasizing coverage of technology specifically impacting African-American communities. They don't limit themselves to African-American-oriented tech news, but their intent is to address the perceived lack of coverage of technology by and about African-Americans. So, for instance, for Black History Month, BlackWeb 2.0 is running 28 notable diverse minorities in tech, right, which is probably something that you won't see on Gizmodo. AroundHarlem.com is a local blog. It covers cultural events of interest to the black community in New York City. And The Angry Black Woman is one of the leading online voices for African-American blogs addressing racism in various media. Now the fun stuff. Okay, so I guess I should read the quotes for you because it's long. So, and then I'll talk a little bit about it. So this is from, this particular quote is from TechCrunch. No one is going to convince me that Google is white by default unless you want to argue that being simple, quick, and useful is white, LOL. The thing is that from an ideal perspective, when a user logs onto the internet, they are starting from a unified and unfiltered position and choose to navigate towards targeted content. The difference here is that someone has developed a tool that controls and filters the experience. I love these scare quotes. Right from the start, they found a way to create a segregated experience. So discussions of Blackbird, this is a relatively unproblematic example, believe it or not. On discussions of Blackbird on the tech blogs tended to focus on an ideal browser and an ideal internet as an information and culturally neutral space for internet consumption that can be configured for individual browsing preferences. These reviewers and commenters, in their focus on Blackbird's cultural features and functions, hide the cultural and ideological nature of the content, while speculating on the utility of features for prospective African American users. So TechCrunch, the guy who reviewed Blackbird for TechCrunch, is a guy named Robert Waters, happens to be white and European, and he mentioned Blackbird's content-based add-ons, the video channels, the news ticker and the like, and he said, but their addition didn't seem like enough of an incentive for African Americans to download another browser. TechCrunch's commenters weren't as circumspect in their understanding of the racial utility of a browser. One said, this is argument, and I didn't anonymize. Thank you. I didn't anonymize the comments, and I can provide URLs if you're interested, so you can go and see that I didn't modify these comments in any way. So this argument summarizes mainstream perceptions of the internet as a neutral cultural space. And it highlights an aspect of TechCrunch's discursive position on technology, that information technologies are objective, and it's only the intervention of certain social and cultural forces that render them as ideological tools. JDB's use of the word segregated clues us into the types of technology that are non-normative and ideological, information or tools exemplifying the interests of Black internet users. So this is the nice one. These are the not nice ones. If Obama starts doing all kinds of nutty stuff, will the standard search return news articles and criticism, and the Blackbird search censor such things? Then my favorite, Blackbird, comes preloaded with links to public defenders and tips on how to beat weapons charges. And then if the browser, as the article states, skews results away from potentially more informative and authoritative sources of information in favor of those that are more cultural-centric, then it is really doing its users a disservice. Now, these comments are from Ars Technica. And the Ars Technica review was done by David Chartier, who also blogs on the unofficial Apple weblog. And his review actually begins with this sentence: "The internet may have created a largely colorblind world web that connects users with just about any information they could ever want." Now, Chartier, as opposed to the Waters review, saw the Blackbird custom search as a positive implementation of the developer's intentions to deliver cultural content, but overall argued functionally that Blackbird's feature set was nothing new. His article is restrained, and it kind of reflects Ars Technica as a community of practice because it understands Blackbird as a tool that serves a community of practice. Users who happen to be Black that want to go on the internet, right? But the comments that follow Chartier's review, several of the Ars Technica audience members offered these less restrained and racialized frameworks to describe Blackbird's feature set. And although the last comment is less overt than the first two, together they work to represent the spectrum of colorblind discourse displayed in Ars Technica's comments. The first comment is an example of deviant Black behavior. The second comment is an example of deviant Black behavior as a cultural touchstone for Blackbird's intended feature set. So, of course, only Black people use public defenders or need weapons charges. While the last comment employs a rational perspective that ignores the cultural perspectives found in mainstream content and privileges that content as being more valid and reliable than culture-centric. Okay. Now, it wasn't all bad. Like, there were TechCrunches in particular, but also Ars Technica to a lesser extent, had positive racial interpretations of Blackbird's potential. But true to the site's ethos, the functional ethos, they remain centered on the browser utility. So this guy says, Blackbird isn't about walled gardens or separatism. It doesn't take you to some Blacks-only internet. It doesn't wipe your hard drive if a white person tries to use it. It's a product designed to appeal to the needs and wants of Blacks. You can disagree with the viability of this model, but there's nothing wrong with the motivation. And so these comments focus on Blackbird's features while skipping over the negative stereotypes of Blacks. These comments are closer to Chartier in particular, his framing of Blackbird as a community of practice, and these sentiments are critical of the colorblind paradigm of internet use that earlier commenters deployed. So, and this is an aside, I am an avid surfer of the gaming blogs, and I keep in touch with TechCrunch and Ars Technica because they're relevant to my interests, and I find that anytime race is introduced into a conversation, or gender, that the comments quickly veer from a community of practice thing to let me show you how masculine I can be by putting down, or how mainstream I can be by putting down other cultures. So these are not atypical comments for a racial or a gender conversation. It just so happens that they were focused on a particular product. And so these comments also serve to highlight another trope of colorblind ICT usage, that Blackbird's users will be forced to segregate themselves from the rest of the internet when making the choice to use Blackbird. And this is something that also comes up in the black blogs, and I'll talk about that in a second. The technology blogs' combination of technophilic ethos and colorblind ideology speak to the norming of technology as a human/white discursive enterprise, where efforts by non-whites to stake out space within the realm are unwelcome. Questions? Am I going too fast? Okay, good. Where the mainstream blogs feature comments critical of Blackbird's feature set and black culture, the black tech blogs critically assess Blackbird's features through their potential benefit to the black community. And so here's someone from the Black Web 2.0 website saying, it is true that if one is very interested in African American perspectives on news and social issues, one has to be savvy in the use of search engines, which do not cough up those results without good Google foo. As a white person with an anti-racist ideology who is interested in reading from black perspectives, I would have downloaded and used the browser just out of curiosity. And so the reviewers, Ronnie Smith on his own blog and Rasheen at Black Web 2.0, Ronnie Smith noted that many African-American users access the internet at work or school where Blackbird can't be installed because of administrative policies, which limits potential use and adoption. So that's a valid criticism, and it also speaks to the possibility that, it also speaks to the truth that many desktop PC users still have work as their primary space where they use the internet. And so this, because Blackbird needs to be installed and you have to participate in those networks within the browser, many people won't use it. Rasheen at Black Web 2.0 praised the video channel. Apparently looking for black girls on YouTube is as problematic as looking for black girls in Google. And was encouraged by Blackbird's stance on philanthropy. However, he argued that Blackbird isn't innovative because, as Chartier said, its core functions duplicated pre-existing features that power users could install on their own. There was a segregation argument over all four of the black blogs. This is April from AroundHarlem.com. April's a really experienced web user, and she has a pretty decent blog empire of her own going on. And she says, I don't need anyone helping me find black content. How is my web experience enhanced by letting Blackbird filter information through their browser? And so this comment represents a prominent perspective of the black blog segregation argument against Blackbird. This argument is that a browser that's dedicated to information about black people limits access to the internet and stifles black innovation and interest in creating content online. Mind you, the browser does not do that. The browser allows you to use WordPress or Blogger. It allows you to use whatever coding tools you need to create. But their argument was that it is a segregation device. And so to support this argument, these bloggers and commenters pointed to features that constrain their freedom. So April's, in terms of her Google search and the curation of the comment, her question was, who did they pick to select this content? Who are their experts? Who are their tastemakers that decided to do this? Another one noted that Blackbird, in the way that many Mozilla installs go, hijacked her default browser status. And so it automatically took over her pre-existing settings, and she had to go into the registry to edit it to get it to stop doing that, which is, if she wasn't a power user, she wouldn't have been able to figure that out. Okay. While making a segregation argument, though, there's something else interesting going on, and that they're articulating a perspective that complicates notions of the digital divide, that all blacks are equally skilled in finding content conducive to their information needs because they have to be. Right? Because they have to do an additional level of filtering for the results that they get through search engines or the like, right? And compare this with the perceptions of black browsing activity on the mainstream blogs, where criticism focused on the cultural deficiencies of black internet users. So the black bloggers construct a positive image of black community in their own spaces, and also in the comments on the mainstream blogs, because April's an active commenter on TechCrunch as well, even while critical of efforts made by the developers on their behalf. Okay. Wow, 30 minutes? Jesus. Okay, so conclusion. The digital divide is insufficient to understand the information needs of minority users. So minority users are just as diverse as mainstream users, but often labor under the stereotype that they can only be understood through one identity category. This stereotype can be particularly limiting during the design and dissemination phase of ICT artifacts, as monocultural influences may lead companies to focus on users that are most like themselves or their most valued customers. ICTs frame and ICTs frame and configure discourse. ICTs do not operate in a vacuum they alter time, format, ethos, and tone. So if you think of the ways in which instant messaging and text message have changed the vocabulary and expectations of feedback from your friends and family, right? Browsers do similar work for that, right? Because in many cases they frame that type of messaging style. Blogs in particular are susceptible to this because they're primarily browser based, and the internet, I can't say that word, theory, where anonymity plus lack of feedback equals people who turn into raving buttholes. So they change the way people operate with relation to each other and with relationship to information. Also, browsers disguise the ideological intent of the content they serve through sheer volume. It's one of the reasons why search engines are so popular, because they helped us to make sense of the sheer amount of information that we are faced with every day. And there's a reason why Google is the #1 homepage for many people and the first page they visit, because that's how you figure out where everything else on the internet is. Right? Search engines can contribute to the confusion, though, depending upon their ranking algorithms. Their results can reflect the interests of advertisers or the aggregate interests, again, of the most profitable community to serve. Okay. Number 3, lessons for cultural design. When designing any technological artifact, not just the browser, ethical and ideological considerations of the target community's information needs is necessary. So bring in the power users, bring in the tastemakers, and the people who are the influences in a particular community, as well as regular run-of-the-mill, blue-collar, whatever you want to call it, people who are going to use the device occasionally, because they will all have differing perspectives on how something should be used, and that will be of value. So this is contextual inquiry, I've forgotten all my ACI. Okay, so tech design should consider the needs of a diverse set of users. For example, for video games, consider allowing users to configure avatars across a wide range of body types, skin colors, hairstyles, and clothing styles. For software artifacts, the diverse focus groups. And a really good example of a software artifact that did not have a cultural consideration is Twitter. So recent discussions online and in the media about the blackening of Twitter revealed that high levels of smartphone penetration in African American neighborhoods, plus cultural discourse styles, the dozens or signifying, whichever you prefer, lead to a software platform and a content platform that is dominated by Black cultural discourse topics. Okay. Number 4, lessons for online communities. The ethos of your site plays a large part in the type of discussions your audience generates. So if you are an online community designer or a weblog owner who wants to foster community in your comments, it is very much on you to decide how your community will interact with themselves and with the wider world. Although many consider the line between freedom of speech and uncivil discourse to be a very fine one, particularly in the West, the reality is that the pseudonymity of online discourse removes social inhibitions against impolite discourse. And that's something to keep in mind if you are intent on creating feedback platforms or feedback forums for people to give you advice on how your program should work or your artifact. Okay, so last word. The blogs examined here were critical of Blackbird's feature set for a number of practical reasons, but also for a number of shared beliefs about what information technology and Web 2.0 should do. In this, they highlight constructions of technocultural identity shaped around ICT practices and technological determinism. So the internet makes us do certain things or allows us to do certain things. But racial frames, however, also shape these technocultural identities. For information science research, it's of particular interest that through the racial intentions of the browser, the various respondents mediate racial identity through their understanding of information technology and information literacy. Right. By examining how these web users interpolate identity and technology through their Western cultural frame racial affiliations, we can gain a greater understanding of how belief and ideology shapes information technology use, implementation, and design. Done. Oh, thanks. And this is my contact information. If any of you wish to contact me, and then this paper, along with other stuff that I've done, is at the iowa.edu, academia.edu website. Questions, comments, criticisms?
So what's the status of Blackbird?
They released the Mac version in late 2009. I could not find any, and that's my own unsophisticated attempts, I could not find any sign of what their share is, but it's definitely not worthy enough of being mentioned when people are talking about which browsers are the ones that people use most. I'm sure it's less than 1% easily. And there's no discussions of it in the black tech communities that I follow. It's just not there.
So when it was released, was there any positive response, or was it all?
They're like, ooh, black people made a browser. And then there were some people in TechCrunch who said, perhaps Mozilla should consider hiring these guys to do cultural design, even though their user interface was ugly. But just the intent, right? Bringing a diverse perspective to saying what type of content would be relevant. Yeah.
So, sorry.
I was going to ask, how much do you think the benefits for what they were trying to get at came from the browser itself versus, say, getting a customized experience through the search engine? Since you said that Google is sort of can be a gateway for a lot of people in what they see.
It's a little bit of both. Constructing a custom search engine, although it's a hell of a lot easier now than it ever has been, is not something that most people are going to take on their own. So providing it in the form of a browser, which people are already familiar with, gives a larger number of people access to this type of search. As the one commenter said, it does take a fair amount of Google food to use the term black and anything to find stuff that is not porn related. I've had that experience happen to me while I was doing my dissertation, right? And I think I'm a relatively capable search engine user. And so putting it in this particular space made it more accessible than perhaps it would have been in any other way. There's really no other channel that you could have used to promote a search engine in particular that people would have taken up on this particular. Although people are now using Twitter as a way of finding information, I'm still not convinced of the utility of that, but that's a discussion for another time.
See, I'm a librarian at heart, so the filtering just makes me kind of, I'm from Korea. I'm from a country where our government is actually filtering the results. And there's North Korea, where they're just totally blocking data usage, or who knows what they're doing there. And I don't know because I can't read content from, North Korean if I go through the Korean website. And it just feels like we're trying to shield the users from what the internet truly is, right? That we're trying to sort of guide them to, the safe results and the results that whoever the group of people who's controlling this thinks is benefiting the community, and that just makes me kind of anxious.
Well, how is that any different than Google engineers deciding how the search engine ranks relevant results and what is determined to be relevant?
But you're not
It's
considering
not
a particular.
Well, but it's the same thing as 40A making some decision about how they're going to rank results and what they're going to include.
Maybe part of it is the perception in this case. That is always going to be the first search engine you see, right? So it's a question of choice where you can make it easy to choose which search engine you want. I think Google has always said we believe that people should have a choice about what search engine they want. We're going to do our best to make the best one, but if there's something else that works better, whether it's a custom Google search engine or something else, that it should be easy to make that the default. Whereas it seems like in this case they made that somewhat harder. I don't know the details, but can you change the landing page, or do you always the start page, or do you always end up?
No, you can change it.
Okay.
You can change it, but for their intents and purposes, that is the one that they feel best serves the base user's needs. So I can understand that. And okay, so kind of to answer your question, but also to answer yours. So to me, the interesting thing about your question is that there's an implicit assumption that information in and of itself is a good, right? And so there's a case that in which people often use that unfiltering information is a bad, right? Because people should have access to all the information they can ever need. And then especially when you want to bring governments into it, then people really get kind of twitchy. But my thing is, the government is necessary in many ways to ensure that we have a civil society. So the idea of the police, right? Without police, you would have lots of cases of, say, I don't know, domestic violence, rape, robbery, murder, because people will be people, right? But the government has decided that it is in their interest to provide a service that allows people who are not physically strong or necessarily financially strong, although that could be argued, to have protection from elements who would prey on them and commit crimes against them. And in some ways, I think the government and commercial institutions have a responsibility when serving content to both provide for a much more diverse set of audiences, but also to understand that many of their users are not tech savvy. Many people do not ever do custom searches or even add multiple search engines to their browser toolbars, right? Most people, I know many people, when they go to the internet to find a specific website, they type it in the Google box, the website they want to get to, and then click on that search result to get there, right? And so there's a lot of unsophisticated information usage. And so knowing that many people are not technologically literate and informationally literate, and that in many cases we allow minors to surf the internet unsupervised, I think there is a responsibility to provide results that are not heavily dominated by porn results. But that's just me. I mean, the key for me is that, at least for me, for this particular exercise, was that black girls is a fairly innocuous term. But the results that you get from that term are problematic.
But I think it's the same with, I tried white girls just now, and a lot of the results that you get is porn. I tried Asian girls, and it's the same. So it's the problem with the content itself that a lot of people are generating. No. I tried black guys too. So even if I search with just men, I get a lot of, homosexual porn. So.
But is that okay?
Well, I mean, so I think we're focusing too much on the porn. So for example, if I'm Korean and I have a website that caters to Korean people's needs, and it filters the results that I see, the results that are positive about Korea. But I think it's important for us to also see the other side, right? If people, there are people who hate Korea, then I want to know what their reasons are, and I want to be there so I can argue with them and sort of educate them why that's not true, and you should, consider a different kind of perspective. And I think maybe we're sort of missing that if we're trying to just provide the results that are just catering to the needs. Sometimes what we want is not what we need,
but
right?
Catering to the needs means that most people are sexual beings? Yeah, I don't know if I'm comfortable with that.
I mean, this is a bit of a non sequitur question, but it seems like this is, if you take this to the extreme, that it was like, okay, so a lot of the reaction from this, for creating this, was because there's this cultural hegemony of whiteness on the internet, and so we want to provide something for black people, and a lot of the reaction against Blackbird was because it seemed like there was this then assumption of black hegemony, of this is what black identity is on the internet, and this is the black internet, and a lot of black people reacted negatively against that. And so it seems like then you take this to the extreme, it's like, where are you going to go? Are you going to have purely individualized technologies? I mean, and then how do you actually design for that? Because what role does culture play in that kind of design context?
I think, and this kind of relates to Gina's question too, I think the end result will be search agents, individual search agents. And so you will have some software tool that you can query, and that will bring you information tailored to your needs whenever you want it, as opposed to a general Google search box. That being said, I think something will be lost in the translation, because by focusing only on the narcissistic individual and what his needs are, you kind of miss what the larger community does. And so that's why I bring the police and the government back in, because somebody has to have a compelling interest for the wider society, and individuals are not wired to necessarily think of what the community needs. They will in abstract, but most people are not abstract thinkers. It's like, master students. Sorry.
So are there any questions from the VC before we kind of wrap up?
Hi, thanks for presenting. What I'm curious about is there are more and more social efforts and self-assembling communities, one of which is Rockmelt, which is a browser that has been similarly skinned, integrated with Facebook as a particular community, but more and more of these all over the place. My question is how the self-assembling communities in a social browser would contribute to or avoid the marginalization that you're talking about today.
I don't know if they can. The discussion, the difference between assimilation and accommodation is something that has plagued minority communities since the beginning of the modern era, right? And so I think Rockmelt fits very neatly into this, on this line between community of practice and community of interest, right? Where it's people who want to use Facebook and a browser versus people who just use Facebook to find their friends. And so this browser brings both those worlds together. But Facebook is another one of those things which is intensely personal and in many ways operates according to the principle of homophily, right? Where your friends will be in many ways much more like you than they will be like other people's friends. Right, and so, and I mean, it will allow people who have formed groups of peers, social and otherwise, through Facebook. RockMelt will allow them to associate with them. But what chance does it give them to interact with outside? And I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. I never thought that being black would limit me from any opportunities that I would ever have. I just kind of run into those obstacles from time to time. But that being said, I find immense value in seeing the world from my identity perspective, and I can't help but think that people who use RockMelt or the people who came up with Blackbird or use Blackbird have similar intentions. Like there's something positive to be said for seeing the world in this way. So does that kind of answer your question?
Sort of. As an engineer, I naturally think of a browser as a component that is culturally and in an identity sense neutral. Now, whether it ties in other pieces of social interaction can stray from that neutrality. And in some sense, having a browser like either Blackbird or RockMelt does not keep you from does not prevent access to all channels that you might want to find, but it does lead you, like you said with the ticker in the browser, and likewise with RockMelt and its social features, it will lead you to like-minded people and a particular channel of thinking that you might be searching for or searching around, conversely.
I agree. So let me just try this from an engineering perspective. As an engineer, the intent is to design something that is functional and of use, right? And for software artifacts, that functionality and use is in many ways integrated with our perceptions of the world as information creatures, right? For more physical artifacts, those constraints are often limited by material aspects. So geographic location, the types of materials available, whatever. For the browser in particular, a lot of people are inclined to think, because we are information people, that there should be no limits. Right, but that in itself is a cultural perspective, right? As Gina pointed out earlier, that the Korean government does think that there should be limits on what type of access should be had, what type of news should be had. I would argue the American government does the same thing. So even if we desire that there should be no limits, there will always be cultural and social limits imposed upon us, and the browser goes a long way towards addressing those things. But there are instances, and I call them ruptures, where we understand that through that rupture that there's a hegemony of ways in which we should see the world, and then there are people who see the world in a slightly different way. So I'm not saying that the browser is a bad thing. That's never my intent. I'm just saying that, and this is one way that we can understand that for many people, the browser does not serve their information needs. This unlimited, unfiltered access to this wide world of information content is in many ways prohibitive to their experience and enjoyment of the internet. And that's a problem.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for your question.